correct. But you're on top of all the stolen property and stuff.
No, that was not my stuff. It wasn't like that. That's what I'm trying to say. It was not like that.
But you're going with them from store to store and they're stealing stuff.
No, I was in the backseat. I was not stealing.
I know you're not.
On the 7th of May, 2025, deputies with the Flagler County Sheriff's Office in Florida responded to a shoplifting call at TJ Maxx. Loss prevention had observed 2 female suspects concealing merchandise inside bags. The suspects exited without paying, passing all points of sale. Loss prevention provided a vehicle description. Deputies located the car shortly after and conducted a traffic stop in Flagler County, Florida.
How you doing? Step out of the car for me.
Yes, sir.
Maybe 60. I believe it's going to be them. I got 3 females in the car. I think they're all involved.
3 females in the car. Oh, yes, sir.
Where y'all coming from? Huh? What? What? No, okay, quit. I said step out of the car, didn't I? Step out of the car. Hey, quit moving around back there. Give me another unit here. I've got a bunch of stolen TJ Maxx stuff in the back.
That stuff not even from there, so I don't care.
Passenger, keep your hands on the dash for me. You keep your hands on that in front of you. Keep your hands up there in front of you, I said.
She didn't even go in the store.
I don't care who. Negative. I got the driver's secure and the other 2 are compliant. Without moving your hands, where's your ID in the car?
I don't have one.
Huh?
I don't have one.
You don't have one? It's a rental car it's showing? It's a rental car in your name?
Okay.
Ma'am, keep your hands on the deck. Put your hands up in front of you, I said. I don't care who she's calling. You understand? Don't drop your hands. Huh? What?
The car went, can I lean up a little bit? I'm not going to run anything crazy.
Yep, I just need to keep an eye on them from where you're at. I've got 3 in the car. I've got driver's secure, still 2 in the car. Driver's black shirt and jeans. Front passenger, a pink shirt and pink shorts. Back passenger is a pink tank top, like a pink sports bra kind of, and multicolored leggings.
That road with it.
Huh?
Oh no, I said that road with it.
I've got hands up on both of the passengers. If you want to get one of them out, you can. I just didn't want to. I just got a driver out. She's in cuffs right now. So whichever one you want, and then the other one, keep your hands on the cuff her out. They match the description, so keep your hands up. Here, just put it right here and get the other one out and cuff her up. Because the other one keeps getting on the phone. Yeah, hang that phone up. Well, we're about to find out, all right? Just check pockets or whatever when you walk them in. We'll just need to do a show up whenever they get over there. You have a valid license or no? Huh? No? You on probation?
No, sir.
You on probation? Where do you live? Where do you live? Gainesville? Where do you live? Palaca?
The deputy orders the driver out and immediately calls for backup. Under Maryland v. Wilson, 1997, officers may order all passengers, not just the driver, from a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. With the driver secured, the deputy spots the back seat. Clothing with TJ Maxx tags still attached. Others forcibly ripped off and scattered on the floor. No bags, no receipts. All of it in plain view. Under the plain view doctrine from Horton v. California, 1990, officers may seize evidence without a warrant when its incriminating nature is immediately apparent and the officer is lawfully on the scene. The deputy broadcasts detailed descriptions of all 3 occupants and coordinates with backup units. A disciplined approach to managing a 3-occupant stop with confirmed stolen property already visible inside the vehicle. Merchandise in the vehicle appears to come from 2 separate stores. The local Flagler County TJ Maxx and a TJ Maxx in Daytona Beach, suggesting a pattern of organized retail theft hitting multiple locations on the same day. Florida Statute Section 812.015 sets the felony threshold at $750. Under Section 812.014, subsection 2, TS, defendants with 2 or more prior theft convictions face enhanced felony charges regardless of the current amount.
I didn't want your hands to come out. You got small wrists. You got small wrists. Just didn't want the cuffs to slip off. Any 60 a Foxtrot unit on TJ Maxx, you can go to LE3. You can walk her back there too. Hey, are you still looking for one there, or do you think she's in the car here? Come right over here for me. You didn't leave anyone back back at?
No, I swear to God, it was 3 of us in the car. And
The driver here is saying that they're all here in the car. They didn't leave anyone behind. Can you do a show up over here?
I'm gonna lie to you, and the pregnant girl never got out of her car. Not
There's 2 inside the store.
me and that girl right there.
You and the other one?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna use the back of my hand just to go over your pockets, make
Yes,
sure you
sir.
get. Is there any weed or anything in the car you know about?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean I can smell it. So. All right. Again, back of my hand. Okay. I'm not grabbing your butt.
Oh, I know.
All right. Turn around and relax right here for me. Turn around and relax. She's saying it was her and another one in the store. She said
The one in your car. I think
There's 2 in my car. Which one?
not the pregnant one.
Which TJ Maxx is the stuff in the back from?
Daytona.
Daytona. Man.
Did you already call out all 3 the same?
I did not. Do you want to run them and ID them? And we can go from there. And you're not on probation?
I'm not on probation, but I am
You got an open case right now? You got on bond?
driving.
For driving? Out of where? Putnam? Well, you said you're Palaca or you're from Palaca? Whose name's the car in?
My sister. Yeah, I'm already seen this on it. I told my sister and 18.
You're out here committing new crimes when you get sentenced? They ain't gonna like that. Sentenced to what? 180 days? Just for driving? Are you habitual? Alright, here, let's walk back here. Let's get you out of the rain and at least get you dry for now. You don't wanna go in the back? Alright. Can you just do a full, do a search of her, please? And I already did the pockets with the back of my hand, but just do a search of her and you put her in there for now. Just get her out of the rain.
Here, come out quick.
Do you have anything illegal on you?
You have anything on you that's going to stick, stab, poke?
I smell weed coming out of there, so let's, the driver said that there's weed in there, but let's make sure none of my medical marijuana card, and then we can at least get that part out of the way. There's a whole bunch of TJ Maxx stuff in the back with tags all thrown on the floor, so. Do you have a medical marijuana card? Is there any marijuana in that vehicle? You don't know? Okay. Marina, do you have a medical marijuana card? Expired. Okay. This has still got a sticker on it. You see all those clothes in the back? They all have TJ Maxx tags on them?
No, there's they stuffed all the tags, started stuffing the tags in the back pocket here.
So the back seat passenger's sitting on all those, the pregnant one. I did ask her, but she's not been Mirandized yet, but the driver said that they were in the Daytona TJ Maxx before that one. But yeah, you can see there's just TJ Maxx stuff freaking everywhere. Yeah. All this stuff, all these freaking tags on it. No bags or no receipts.
No, there's all the inventory control devices. Yeah, watch out because they're pointy ends.
Yeah. Here's the driver's in. Do you see a purse or anything else on the front? Is anyone's name? Yeah. Was there any IDs or anything? I mean, look at all those tags right in front of where the one in the back's sitting. Yeah. That are all ripped off.
The rear seat passenger, visibly pregnant, denies involvement, but the physical evidence tells another story. She was sitting directly on top of the stolen merchandise, with forcibly removed security tags piled in front of her seat. Florida's Constructive Possession doctrine holds that a person need not steal an item to face possession charges. Knowledge and control over stolen property is sufficient, and proximity under these facts can satisfy that legal standard. A vehicle search reveals anti-shoplifting device removal tools, alongside the clothing instruments, specifically designed to defeat retail security systems. Their presence is direct evidence of premeditation, not a spontaneous decision. Under Florida Statute Section 812.015, subsection 6, possession of a device to defeat an anti-shoplifting mechanism is a standalone criminal offense charged independently from the underlying grand theft counts already supported by the evidence. Florida Statute Section 812.0155 defines organized retail theft as a conspiracy by 2 or more persons to commit retail theft. When aggregate value exceeds $3,000, the offense becomes a second-degree felony under Florida law. This case fits that framework. Multiple suspects, 2 confirmed store locations, anti-shoplifting tools recovered, and a same-day pattern of targeted visits. Every element of a coordinated booster crew operation is present in the evidence. The 2 primary suspects were charged with possession of an anti-shoplifting device and grand theft, elevated to felony level by 2 prior theft convictions each. Recovered merchandise from multiple TJ Maxx locations exceeded $1,000. The rear seat passenger was not charged at the scene. Deputies photographed her for identification. Surveillance footage from the Daytona Beach store remains under review. The case is pending in the Flagler County court system.
So the pregnant one was here sitting on all these clothes, and right in front of her is all the ripped off tags.
Which one did you say they're both pregnant? The one in the pink?
The one with just the top.
The one that's obvious?
Yes.
Obvious.
The one in just the sports bra looking thing. She was here with all the ripped off tags and everything it's all up there in front of that.
Did we call the trunk yet?
No, we haven't gotten the trunk yet. But they're saying that they were at Daytona TJ Maxx before this one. Where the pregnant one in the back was sitting is one of those metal tags. So like they were popping those off too. So you're the only one that doesn't have a prior theft conviction? But you two have lots. Lots of theft convictions. Hey, you're sitting on a bunch of stolen stuff in the car.
I didn't steal nothing. No,
You're sitting on it all.
no, I was not sitting on it. I swear for God, I was,
You were in the back seat, right?
but that was not my
I know,
stuff.
but all this clothes right here, you were literally, when you got out of the car, it was behind you. You were sitting on it.
I literally asked the lady that just took her. I told her when I was asleep, I was laying down and I was not hiding them. I swear for
So all of it was, you were laying on top of all of it.
No, not like to hide it, but I was using
I know,
it as
but
cushion to like, what?
And the other thing is all the tags that are all pulled off are all right in front of where you're sitting in the
I
back
swear
of it.
for God, that was not me, sir.
I mean, you need better friends than I imagine, right?
But they told you I wasn't stealing. Like, I wasn't stealing. Like, that man can confirm. We can go watch those
I know.
cameras.
Yeah, you weren't in there, correct. But you're on top of all the stolen property and stuff.
No, that was not my stuff. It wasn't like that. That's what I'm trying to say. It was not like that.
But you're going with them from store to store and they're
No,
stealing
I
stuff.
was in the backseat. I was not stealing.
I know you're not getting out, but you're in the car with them going store to store.
I did not know, sir. I swear for God, I did not know.
Okay, you gotta check it up with the deputy that's investigating it. You need to ask him. We'll talk to her when she gets back up here.
Because I was not stealing. Like, what? I did not do nothing. They could vouch for that. I did not steal. That's not none of my stuff. That's not mine. I don't steal. You see my truck. I don't steal. This is not my cup of tea at all.
Well, why don't you tell them to stop? Why are you with them?
All she asked me to do was ride with her. I did not know. All she said was, can you please ride with me? I said, I'm just going to, me and her sister, before she dropped her sister off, she said, I need one of y'all to ride with me. I was going to go in the house and she looked.
In what city?
Putnam County.
In Palaca.
I'm not even from here.
In Palaca?
Yeah, I'm from Gainesville. I was just with her because that's my child's godmother. All she said was, I need somebody to ride with me. I said, okay, cool.
Problem is that they come out of here with all this stuff with no bags, no receipts. You're laying on top of all of it.
I wasn't doing it like that to hide it. I was not doing that. That's not
but you're laying on top of all of it. It's all stolen stuff.
Not my stolen shit. No, hell no. Not my stolen shit. Sorry, excuse my French, but not my stolen
you're the
shit.
one. Yeah, I get it.
No, not the
I
one.
get it.
Like
You're
that.
laying on top of it, and then all the tags that are popped off are all in your seat right in front of where you're sitting.
Hell
Yeah.
no.
No one else is in the bag. It's
I'm
just
trying
you.
to tell you, like, I did not do that.
I know, but no one else is in the bag. It's just you.
You don't think these people they probably did that? I did not do that. What I'm gonna touch that stuff for? I don't want it. It's not my stuff. I did not do. No, that's not. No. I'll talk to the deputy. I'll talk to the deputy. No.
So the deputy that's investigating it is dropping the witness back off at the store, and then they'll come up here and talk to you. But you're under arrest for sure. Are you out on bond right now? Because you got a bunch of theft history in tons of different counties. So this is a felony for you, for both of them, for you and the girl driver.
Real, she got felony?
Yeah, they've been arrested she been arrested a bunch for stealing, like 10 times probably.
Only one I know is doing this bad though.
She been arrested a bunch for stealing too. But you're in the car, you're involved in this. Yeah, you're in it, whether you want to be or not. I don't think so. Toshi's done. I'm just waiting on them to. They got all the stolen property inside the car. They still got to take back to TJ Maxx. Apparently, it was stolen from a different TJ Maxx, like in Daytona. All that. I tested the weed for them, like a bunch of hats from like Hobby Lobby. So let me ask you before this, because they're pulling all the Daytona store video. Were you in Daytona store?
No, sir.
TJ Maxx?
No, sir.
Hobby Lobby?
No, sir.
You sure? You never went any store?
The lead deputy receives an A-. Immediate scene control, accurate plain view identification, disciplined radio communication, and demonstrated on-camera awareness of Miranda limitations before pressing for further statements. The primary suspects receive a D. Overwhelming evidence, loss prevention observation, anti-shoplifting tools, prior convictions triggering Florida Statute 812.014, enhancement and a traceable rental car, left no meaningful defense at the scene. The rear passenger receives a C+, not observed in any store, but sitting on stolen goods with removed tags directly in front of her creates real constructive possession exposure. Not arresting her at the scene was the correct call. Lesson 1. Choosing to remain in a vehicle while others commit theft does not guarantee legal protection. Under Florida's Constructive Possession Doctrine, Proximity to stolen property can be enough to support criminal charges. Lesson 2. Using a rental car registered in a known name, carrying anti-shoplifting removal tools, and hitting multiple stores in one day transforms retail theft into documented premeditation and a felony-level organized retail theft charge. Lesson 3. Verbalizing plain view observations on Bodycam, calling out occupant descriptions over radio, and knowing Miranda limits, before questioning, are the habits that protect both the investigation and the officer in court. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic that you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching today's video. If you found this content informative or compelling, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so you will be the first to know when we release new uploads. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you the most fascinating police interactions, courtroom proceedings, and real-world legal moments, and there is a lot more on the way. We appreciate your support, and we will see you in the next one.
God, no, sir.
Was she in any of these stores? No?
We're gonna find out if you were.
Yeah.
We could all go to the picture.
Okay,
Really cool. Yeah, you need to get good pictures of her before you cut her loose.
Let me take a picture.
Yeah, just take the two and be done with it.
Pose.
Yeah.